The old Hogan house had always been a place of quiet sorrow, but for Peter, it was the only sanctuary he had left. It stood at the end of a gravel drive, its white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, surrounded by oaks that seemed to hunch their shoulders against the sky. He'd moved back in after the accident that claimed their parents, the same accident that had fractured his own mind. Now, with the world outside beginning to curdle, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. The first sign that something was profoundly wrong came not from the news, which was a frantic, contradictory mess, but from the silence that followed. The constant hum of distant traffic from the state highway ceased, as if a great hand had muffled the world. Then the power died, and the phones became useless black bricks. Natalie and Denzel arrived 2 days later in a beat-up SUV, their faces drawn with a fear that was entirely new. Natalie, ever the pragmatic older sister, had the look of someone trying to assemble IKEA furniture while the house burned down around her. Denzel, a sturdy, reliable man who worked in construction, had a grip on his hunting rifle that was a little too tight. "It's not just riots." "Pete?" Natalie said, her voice low as they sat around the kerosene lamp in the living room. The shadows danced across the faces of their parents in the old portraits on the wall. "We saw things. People, but not people. They were eating someone. In the middle of the street." Peter just nodded, his fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. He felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes, a shifting sensation in his consciousness. He fought it down, not now, not in front of them. "We'll be safe here," Denzel said, his voice a forced baritone of confidence. "We've got supplies, well water, and I've boarded up the ground floor windows. We just need to ride this out until the army gets it sorted." But Peter knew, with a cold certainty that came from living in a fractured reality, that nothing was going to be sorted. The world had torn, and something from the other side was pouring through. That night, the noises began, a low guttural moaning that seemed to emanate from the very soil. Then came the scratching at the doors, a dry, persistent sound like rats with bones for claws. It was too much for Peter. The fear, the pressure, the breaking of the world. It was a key turning in the lock of his mind. He felt himself recede, a spectator in his own skull. A different set of eyes blinked open. The body stood up, stretching Peter's limbs with a fluid, predatory grace that was not his own. The posture changed, the slouch replaced by a straight-backed alertness. The face, Peter's face, settled into a cold, analytical expression. Gamma was in control. He walked to the window, ignoring Natalie's whispered, "Peter?" He peered through a crack in the boards. In the moonlight, he saw them. Shambling figures in tattered clothing, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Their skin was a waxy gray, their eyes milky and vacant. Blood and other less identifiable substances stained their mouths and clothes. Zombies. The word was a cliché, but the reality was a primal gut punch of revulsion. But Gamma saw more. Moving amongst the shamblers were other things. Tall, slender shapes that seemed to be made of shifting shadow, with limbs that bent in too many places. They moved with a silent, insectoid speed, herding the dead. One of them paused, and Gamma felt, rather than saw, a pair of glowing red pinpricks fix on his position from the tree line. "Fascinating," Gamma murmured, his voice a flat, dispassionate instrument. "Peter, what are you doing?" Denzel hissed, coming up behind him. "My name is Gamma," he replied without turning, "and I am assessing the threat. The reanimated cadres are a blunt instrument. But the others, the Stalkers, they possess a rudimentary intelligence. They are the hunters. The dead are the hounds." Denzel and Natalie exchanged a look of pure horror. They knew about Peter's condition, his dissociative identity disorder. He'd been stable for years, his personalities, or headmates as his therapist called them, dormant. But they had names for them, from the detailed journals Peter kept. Gamma was the strategist, cold and logical. Seeing him in person was terrifying. "Okay, Gamma," Natalie said, forcing calm into her voice. "What do we do?" Gamma turned, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. The perimeter is insufficient. The dead will eventually break through. Our priority is the basement. It has a single heavy door and no external windows. We move all essential supplies down there. We have 6 hours until sunrise. Their visual acuity seems low. We can use the daylight to plan our next move. Under Gamma's direction, they worked through the night. He was ruthlessly efficient, discarding sentimental items in favor of practical ones: water, canned food, medical supplies, tools. He had Denzel reinforce the basement door with steel brackets he found in the garage. He was a machine, and for a few hours his cold competence was a shield against the terror outside. But as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, the pressure in his head returned. Gamma's cool analysis was replaced by a wave of frantic energy. The body stumbled, grabbing the wall for support. When he looked up, the expression was wide-eyed, manic. A giggle, high and unnerving, bubbled up. "Whoa, Nellie! This is a tight squeeze, isn't it?" The voice was Vippa's, fast and jittery. Lots of grumpy folks outside. Didn't get their morning coffee, I bet. Boom chakalaka! Natalie's heart sank. Vippa was the embodiment of chaotic, childlike energy, useful for distracting Peter from pain, a catastrophe in a survival situation. Vippa, we need to be quiet, Natalie pleaded. Quiet as a mouse, tight as a house, Vippa whispered loudly, then mimed zipping his lips and throwing away the key. He began tiptoeing around the basement, examining tools with a distracting fascination. He picked up a crowbar and started conducting an invisible orchestra. Denzel rubbed his temples. This is a nightmare. Their reprieve came an hour later. Vippa was in the middle of an elaborate, silent tap dance when he suddenly froze, his head cocked. The manic energy drained from his face, replaced by a placid, simple smile. Bagga was now present. "Oh," Bagga said, his voice a slow, deep rumble. "Heavy door, good. Keep the bad smells out." He sat down on a crate, his large hands resting on his knees. He was simple, strong, and literal. He wouldn't be much for conversation, but he wasn't a liability. The day passed in a nerve-shredding limbo. The moans and scratches from outside were a constant soundtrack. Occasionally, a heavy thud would shake the house as one of the stalkers tested its strength. Bagga, unperturbed, ate 2 cans of beans and fell into a deep, snoring sleep. It was late afternoon when the shift happened again. Peter's body twitched, and when the eyes opened, they were filled with a sharp, maternal warmth. "Oh, you poor dears," Melissa whispered, her voice soft and soothing. She immediately went to Natalie, who was shaking with silent tears, and wrapped her in a hug. "You're exhausted. You and Denzel get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Melissa was the nurturer, the caregiver. She fussed over them, making sure they drank water and had blankets. She sang a soft old lullaby, her voice a balm in the darkness. For a few precious hours, there was a semblance of peace. It was Melissa who noticed the first sign of a different kind of danger. "The air," she murmured, sniffing. "Do you smell that?" "Like ozone. And rotting honey." A faint, sickly sweet smell was indeed seeping under the basement door. As they watched, a thin, almost invisible mist began to coil into the room. "Don't breathe it in," Denzel coughed, pulling his shirt over his nose, but it was too late. Natalie started to sway, her eyes becoming glassy. Denzel's movements became sluggish. Melissa felt a terrible lassitude creeping over her, a desire to just lie down and sleep forever. As she slipped from consciousness, the last personality to emerge before the blackness took them all was one she feared. Peter's body convulsed on the floor. When it stilled, it rose with a new, terrifying authority. The eyes burned with a fervent, religious light. Ashraf had arrived. He looked around the basement with disdain, at his sleeping sister and her husband, at the feeble fortifications. "This is a test," he intoned, his voice echoing with fanatical conviction. "A purging of the weak. The faithful shall be spared." He believed the monsters outside were demons, a divine plague, and he believed he was the instrument of their destruction. He saw the sleeping Denzel not as a brother-in-law, but as a potential sacrifice, a soul to be offered for salvation. He picked up Denzel's hunting rifle. He didn't know how to use it, but he saw it as a holy symbol. He marched to the basement door, his mind racing with scripture and madness. He began to unbar it. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," he chanted. It was the sound of the heavy brackets being slid back that jolted Natalie awake. The mist had dissipated, but its sedative effect lingered. She saw Ashraf, his back to her, about to unleash hell. "No!" she screamed, lunging forward. She tackled him just as he got the door open an inch. They fell in a heap, the rifle clattering away. Ashraf was strong, fueled by his zealotry. He clawed at her, his eyes wild. "Witch! You stand with the fallen!" Denzel woke then, groggy but spurred by adrenaline. He pulled Ashraf off Natalie, pinning him to the floor. The struggle was violent, short-lived. With a final guttural curse, Ashraf's eyes rolled back and Peter's body went limp. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Then Peter groaned. His own eyes, confused and terrified, fluttered open. "Natalie? Denzel? What happened? The last thing I remember is Gamma." He saw the fear on their faces, the overturned crate, the rifle on the floor. Oh, God. Who was it? Was it Ashraf? Natalie just nodded, tears streaming down her face. The monsters outside were one thing. The monster within was another. That was the true turning point. The basement was no longer just a shelter from the external threat. It was a prison cell containing their own personal demon. They tied Peter's hands and feet with rope, a heartbreaking necessity. He sobbed, apologizing over and over, while Natalie assured him it was okay, that they would get through this. But the incident had drawn attention, the scuffle, the shouting. Something big was now throwing itself against the main floor of the house. They could hear the splintering of wood, the shattering of glass. "They're in the house," Denzel said, his voice hollow. Gamma resurfaced then, the crisis snapping him back into control. He assessed the situation with a quick, clinical glance. "The rope. Untie me. Now," he commanded. His tone brooked no argument. Hesitantly, Denzel did so. Gamma stood, rubbing his wrists. "They are inside the structure. Our position is compromised. We have one advantage. They do not know we are down here. But they will find the door. We cannot stay." "So we fight our way out?" Denzel asked, hefting his rifle. "No, we run. Our objective is the old storm shelter in the woods, 200 yards north-northwest. It's buried, camouflaged. They may not know it's there." 200 yards? Through that? Natalie gasped. "It is our only statistically viable option," Gamma stated. "We go on my mark. We do not stop for anything." He armed himself with the crowbar. Denzel had the rifle with only a handful of shells. Natalie took a hatchet. Peter, lurking somewhere beneath the surface, was a passenger. Gamma listened at the door. The sounds of destruction from above were moving away, towards the back of the house. "Now," he shoved the door open. The basement stairs led up into the ruined kitchen. The house was a charnel house. Furniture was smashed, and dark, bloody smears painted the walls. The stench of death was overwhelming. A single zombie, a former postal worker by its uniform, was shuffling through the wreckage. Its head snapped towards them, and it let out a wet moan. Gamma didn't hesitate. He moved forward, a blur of motion, and brought the crowbar down on its skull with a sickening crunch. The thing crumpled. "Move," he ordered. They sprinted through the torn-open front door and into the twilight. The cool air was a relief, but it was short-lived. The moans erupted around them. Figures emerged from behind trees, from the tall grass, shambling towards them with a relentless hunger. "Run!" Denzel yelled, firing a shot that took the leg off a nearby zombie. It fell, but continued crawling after them. They ran, their feet pounding on the gravel drive. The woods loomed ahead, a dark promise of safety. But then, the Stalkers appeared. Two of the shadowy creatures dropped from the branches of the oaks, landing with unnatural silence. They were taller than a man, their skin like polished obsidian, with long, multi-jointed arms that ended in wickedly sharp claws. Their red eyes burned with malevolent intelligence. One lunged for Natalie. Denzel fired, the shot sparking off its shoulder. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and recoiled. The other went for Gamma. He was ready, meeting its charge with the crowbar. He was impossibly fast, parrying a clawed swipe and jamming the metal bar into the creature's torso. It hissed, black ichor oozing from the wound. "Go! To the woods!" Gamma shouted, grappling with the stalker. Natalie and Denzel didn't need telling twice. They plunged into the tree line, the sounds of the fight echoing behind them. They crashed through the undergrowth, their breath sobbing in their chests. Behind them, the moans of the dead grew closer. The entire horde was converging on them. They reached a small clearing, and there it was. A rusted, metal hatch set into the ground, nearly invisible under a layer of moss and leaves. "Here!" Denzel yelled, grabbing the heavy ring pull. It was stuck. Years of rust and disuse had sealed it shut. He pulled with all his might, his muscles straining. Natalie added her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The zombies were entering the woods now, a wall of rotting flesh and desperate hunger, maybe 30 strong. And behind them, the 2 stalkers were moving in, herding them, their red eyes fixed on the trapped humans. "It's no use!" Natalie cried, despair finally overwhelming her. It was then that Peter's body, which had been standing frozen, shuddered. Gamma was gone, spent from the fight. The terror of the moment, the sight of his sister's despair, triggered something else. Something new. The body didn't twitch or convulse. It simply stilled. The panic in Peter's eyes faded, replaced by a profound, ancient calm. The posture softened, yet radiated an unexpected strength. When he spoke, the voice was different from all the others. It was gentle, yet firm, melodic. "Step aside," the voice said. Natalie and Denzel stared, bewildered. This wasn't Gamma, Vippa, Bagga, Melissa, or Ashraf. Peter, or whoever it was, stepped forward. He placed his hands not on the rusted ring, but on the metal of the hatch itself. He closed his eyes. A faint, warm light seemed to emanate from his palms, so subtle it might have been a trick of the fading light. The sound of grinding metal was deafening, and with a final, shrieking protest, the hatch broke free. Denzel didn't question it. He hauled the door open, revealing a dark, damp hole with a metal ladder descending into blackness. "Get in," he shouted to Natalie. She scrambled down. Denzel turned to Peter. "Come on." The new personality looked past Denzel, at the horde now only 20 yards away. He smiled, a sad, gentle smile. "I will hold the door," he said. "My name is Kael, and this is what I am for." "No, Peter, get in here," Natalie screamed from the darkness below. Kael shook his head. "Peter is safe. He is resting. Now, you must be safe too." He placed his hands on the hatch again. As the first zombie lunged for him, a shimmering, translucent wall of light, like heated air, erupted from the ground around the hatch, forming a dome. The zombie slammed into it and was thrown back, its flesh smoldering. The other creatures piled against the barrier, unable to breach it. Kael stood inside the dome, his hands raised, his face a mask of serene concentration. The stalkers shrieked in frustration, clawing at the energy field. Denzel, seeing the miracle for what it was, made a choice. He dropped down into the shelter and pulled the heavy hatch shut above him, plunging them into absolute darkness. The last thing he saw was Kael, standing like a beacon, holding back the tide of hell. Silence. Then a faint, sizzling sound from above. A tremor ran through the ground. And then, nothing. Natalie and Denzel huddled together in the pitch-black shelter, listening to the muffled, furious sounds of the monsters outside. They listened for hours, until exhaustion claimed them. When Natalie awoke, it was to utter silence. No moans, no scratching, just the sound of Denzel's breathing. Cautiously, they pushed open the hatch. Morning light, clean and bright, streamed in. They climbed out, weapons ready. The clearing was empty. No zombies, no stalkers. Just the trampled grass and the open, rusted hatch. And there, sitting propped against a tree, was Peter. He was unconscious, but breathing steadily. He was unharmed. In his lap was a single, perfect white flower, blooming in a patch of earth that had been scorched black in a perfect circle around him. They never saw Kael again. In the weeks that followed, as they navigated the shattered world, moving from shelter to shelter, Peter's other personalities would still emerge. Gamma to plan their route, Melissa to tend to their spirits, even Vippa to provide a moment of fractured levity. Ashraf was quieter, his fanaticism dampened, as if the presence of Kael had put his own fervor in perspective. But Peter himself remembered nothing of Kael. He only remembered a feeling of profound peace and a dream of holding back the darkness with nothing but light. They never spoke of it to anyone else. In a world overrun by the dead and the monstrous, their story was already unbelievable enough. But Natalie and Denzel knew. The greatest horror wasn't just the monsters that walked the earth, but the fractured mind of the brother they loved. And within that terrifying, broken landscape, they had also found a miracle. A final secret protector who had been there all along, waiting for the world to end so he could, for one brilliant moment, begin.